Hi, and welcome to another episode of My Take. And my name is Taiwo. Today, I want to talk to you, or I want to ask you the question: who are you? Who are you? A couple of episodes back, I talked about who God was, and I did that because I've realized that it is necessary to know who God is before we know who we are, because our identity is based on or found in who God is. If you and I are God's children, then we ought to look like, or people identify that we are our Father's children. In fact, the Bible says the people knew the disciples because they had been with Jesus. They had become like Jesus. They were behaving like Jesus. In the same way, Romans chapter 8 says that Jesus, as a word, I think in Romans 8:30, that Jesus is the first amongst many brethren. So if people should see you, people should see me, and they should, in fact, know that they are looking at Jesus, or they are looking at God, because they see you and because they see me. Let me start by reading 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 26 to 29, and then we will launch from that text. For you see your calling, brethren, that not many wise according to the flesh, not many mighty, nor not many noble are called. But God has chosen the foolish things of the world to put to shame the wise, and God has chosen the weak things of the world to put to shame the things which are mighty. And the base things of the world and the things which are despised, God has chosen, and the things which are not, to bring to nothing the things that are. That's quite a mouthful, but the truth is what it's saying. All of this is that, I apologize, in verse 29, this is that no flesh should glory in his presence. Meaning, God chooses the things that are least expected, the things that men don't believe count for anything, and God uses those things, as it were, to confound the wise. And he does those things so that no flesh should glory in his presence, so that you and I realize that we are who we are because of God, or we are who we are by God's grace. Like I said in an earlier episode, I talked about who God is, and in this episode, I want to address who you are, because it takes understanding who God is to know who you are, to know who I am. If we misunderstand who God is, or don't spend time discerning who God is, you and I will work contrary to the will of God, and misunderstand who we are. Implicit in that scripture that I read is that God often doesn't use people who are reckoned with. He uses the people that are discarded, that are seen or counted as nothing, to prove his existence, to prove his might and his power, and so that the people themselves don't think my strength or my ability has brought me this far, but it is God who has done this. Let me say the first thing: you are who you are by the grace of God. So don't take yourself too seriously. You and I are who we are by the grace of God. So don't take yourself too seriously. And let me say this: when 75 million people affirm you, that is an ego booster. When 75 million people vote and say you are the guy, that can be intoxicating, and your ego can go through the roof until you find out that the other person, your opponent, who you think is nothing, who you deem to be a nobody, gathers 81 million votes. Now that will give you perspective. Because you understand that you are who you are by the grace of God. 1 Corinthians chapter 15 says in verse 9 to 10, "For I am the least of the apostles, who am not worthy even to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church." This is what Apostle Paul was saying. "But by the grace of God, I am what I am." Understanding that whatever you and I are in life, it's not because of our own craftiness or our own wisdom, but because of God who has chosen to elevate you. It is God that elevates one and pulls down or pulls down another. It is God that establishes one person and, as it were, disesteems somebody else. So if you think you've come so far in life by your own effort, be very careful, because God might just want to show you who is in charge. So the first thing I want to say is, you are, or we are who we are by God's grace. Number two, you and I are not defined by other people, but by God. Comparing ourselves to other people may spur us to be a better or to be our best self, but a competitive spirit can lead us to discontent because we get our value from other people. We compare ourselves to other people, so if we think we are better than them, then we feel good. But if we think they're better than us, then we don't feel good. Or some people have this mindset that when they enter into a room, they start, as it were, sizing everybody up to know who is who and who can I talk to, who shouldn't I talk to, who is above me, who is beneath me, and who can I relate with. That should never be the mindset of a believer. You are not defined by other people. You are who you are by the grace of God, and more importantly, you are complete in Him. So when you go to that room, you've come to be a blessing. When you go into that room, you have come to be a blessing. Comparing ourselves to other people, like I said earlier, can lead us to become the best version of ourselves, because other people spur you on. When you see a friend who is doing well, it may spur you on to work harder, and you become the best version of yourselves. But that is different than having a competitive spirit, where you begin to find your sense of value or self-worth by comparing yourself to somebody else. That is not wise. This is what Apostle Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 12. "For we dare not class ourselves or compare ourselves with those who commend themselves, but they, measuring themselves by themselves and comparing themselves among themselves, are not wise." There's no wisdom in comparing yourself to somebody else. We are all on this journey, and every person is on a journey that is particular and specific to you. So who are you? You are not defined by other people, but by God. You are who you are, number one, by God's grace, and number two, you are not defined by other people. And the third point I want to say finally is, you are made in God's image and God's likeness, and God is love. Love is selfless, and it gives of itself to others in service. You are made in God's image and in God's likeness. God is love. That is God's image. That is God's nature. God is love. And that love is selfless, and it gives of itself in service to others. You are not a BSc. You are not an MA or an MSc. You are not an MBA or a PhD. Now, when people meet for the first time, we are prone to, I think, about the second or the third question we ask is, after "hi, how are you?" the next thing is, "and what do you do?" Because we are defined by what we do. In fact, that's a basis for having conversation. That's a basis. It shapes whether we are worth attending to. And so that's the way we are shaped. That's the way we are. We live our lives. Because people are going to ask you, and what do you do? And so I'm a PhD, or I'm an MSc, or I'm an MBA. And those things as well determine our self-worth. People choose to talk to us or regard us because we are that thing or the other. Rather, what God celebrates is not your MA or your MSc, but your service. If your MA or your MSc or your PhD makes you a better servant, right on. And that's the best place to be. But if it's for an ego trip, that doesn't mean anything as far as God's kingdom is concerned. What God celebrates is your service and not those accomplishments. On your deathbed, those accomplishments would not matter, but rather whether you have served the generation. What you want to know is, what did I do? What did I do with my life? Did I serve my generation? Not whether I had a PhD and an MBA and an LLM or whatever else to my name. Those things wouldn't matter as far as one's life is concerned. This is what Matthew chapter 25 says from verse 14 through 18. For the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country, who called his own servants and delivered his goods to them. And to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his own ability. And immediately he went on a journey. And then he who had received 5 talents went and traded with them and made another 5 talents, making it 10. And likewise he who had received 2 gained 2 more also. But he who had received 1 went and dug in the ground and hid his Lord's money. In that story, there were 3 groups, there were 3 people, and all of them, well, 2 of the 3 knew to go and trade, as it were, and multiply their talents, as it were, to bring back to God. And there was an expectation from the landowner, expecting that they will take their talent and multiply it. But one person simply took his talent and hid it in the ground and went to go live his life. That is how many people live their lives. They are never concerned about why God made them. They are only concerned about what they want to do with their lives and live their lives according to their own definition of success. So I am going to implore or encourage you not to live your life that way. You and I are a demonstration of God on the earth. Now, for all of God's glory and God's majesty, God is still your Father, in spite of all of your imperfections and all of my imperfections. So here's a God who is perfect, who has great majesty and great glory. And yet he is a father to a broken vessel. He is a father to you and I who are imperfect. And the only glue between 2 of us is his love, because he chooses to believe the best of us. He chooses not to see our imperfections, but to love us in spite of our imperfections. You and I ought to do the same for other people. And in 1 John chapter 4, verse 16 and 17, it says, and we have known and believed the love that God has for us. God is love, and he who abides in love abides in God, and God in him. Love has been perfected among us in this, that we may have boldness in the day of judgment, because as he is, so are we in this world. Because as God is, God's nature should be evident in you and I. Here's a perfect God who loves people who are broken. You and I ought to love others who are broken just like we are. We are no better than those people. We ought to love them. So who are you? Who are you? You and I are a demonstration of God in the earth. First of all, you are who you are by the grace of God. Number 2, you are not defined by other people but by God. And thirdly, You are made in the image and likeness of God. And guess what? God is love. And you are love. You ought to display love. You and I ought to walk in love and not in judgment or in condemnation. If God, who is perfect, can love us who are broken, the least you and I can do is love somebody else who is broken. That is who you are. That is who I am. It's not your PhD, not your MSc, not your MBA, but you and I are love. I hope this blesses you. I know this list is not exhaustive. If you have any questions, you can send me an email through the email that's listed at the bottom of your screen. Otherwise, you can leave your comments. And more importantly, if you like the video, you like the message, please subscribe to the channel, like us, and click on the notification button so we can share more videos with you as they become available. Again, my name is Taiwo, and this is my take. Have a blessed day. Bye.